Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another LogiSYM webinar. My name is Joe Lombardo. I'm the editor of the LogiSYM magazine. Also joining me this morning is the president of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society, Dr. Ramon Krishna. The topic of our webinar this morning is the supply chain visibility, fact or fiction. And joining us are two guests, Stephanie Krishna, the research director at IDC Manufacturing Insights for Asia Pacific, and Jeff Weiner, the co-founder and chief customer officer from Haven Inc. Welcome to you. Let us start with asking you a question, ladies first. Could you share with us a little bit about your background, experience, and some of the significant achievements of your career so far?
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the time today, and thanks for everybody for dropping in. My name is Stephanie Krishnan. I am currently looking after research for Industry 4.0 and supply chain with IDC in Asia Pacific. Prior to that, I have had significant exposure in the academic field. So I used to be a supply chain professor, and also ran my own business as well as being involved in multinationals. So I've had quite a wide experience. It's given me, it's been quite a ride. So yeah, thank you.
Jeff, your turn.
Sure. Thanks everybody for having me. I love talking about supply chain things, so hopefully I don't go too long. But I grew up in the supply chain. I first was at Apple. I launched the first versions of the iPhone, iPad mini, and I scaled several sites from roughly 3,000 to 150,000 people. I then went to an Internet of Things startup, which is a digitally connected home company called Nest. We were subsequently purchased by Google, and so I joined Google and grew their hardware division. And then I left to found Haven because I realized that the supply chain was woefully behind in new and modern technology, and that brings me on a long five-year path to here, talking with you guys now, where I'm responsible for implementations, customer retention, all of our customer use cases, and really making sure that they're getting the value out of technology in their supply chains.
Thank you for those introductions. Excellent. Jeff, can I start off with you first? Clearly, we are going through very difficult times and very disruptive times. What are the challenges facing your organization in general today?
Yeah, I think, first of all, we're in a global environment. And there's a lot of things happening, right? So how do you prioritize all of the things that are happening in your organization now? The speed at which organizations need to move, at which data flows is increasing. So how do you prioritize and get through that? And I think ultimately, that's where those challenges are, because you can get distracted extremely quickly. From an organizational perspective, both for us as an organization, as a software company, as well as all of the customers that I end up seeing on how they can get through the current world on priorities.
And following up from that, I mean, what are the prioritization critical factors to consider? I mean, you say prioritization, but there are many priorities. What is the starting point for you?
Yeah, you look at where honestly, what I try to help our customers do is you look at where the organizational debt is. There's always places that have fallen behind. And so you look at where that organizational debt is, how much money it's costing you, and then what you can take as steps to get through it ultimately. Okay. And because everywhere, every stone you turn over in an organization, you see potential creepy crawly things that you need to address. And so that's how we start to talk about it.
Okay, let's go to the core of our webinar, supply chain visibility. Steph, if I could ask you, what is your definition of supply chain visibility?
Well, supply chain visibility looks at a number of different things. And when we look at supply chain visibility, there's two key areas, which is accessibility and availability. And that is looking at things like, accessibility from a physical perspective, looking at being able to have the inventory available when it's needed, being able to access the data that allows you to make really, really quick decisions about that. And that goes up and down the supply chain. Looking at transportation, it's sometimes an area that gets forgotten when we look at supply chain visibility. So it's important when we look at supply chain visibility that it is looking at the entire supply chain, upstream and downstream. So from an accessibility perspective, you're looking at cloud, You're looking at being able to have the data available in a meaningful way that's going to be able to allow you to make those quick decisions, to be able to have transactional decisions as well as strategic decision enablement. So that's key to supply chain visibility.
And that's a big challenge. Jeff, what is your definition? How do you address this? And I know you got a slide on this too.
Yeah, so with Haven and with our customers, just to take what Stephanie mentioned one step further, everything in the middle of these systems, you can think about whether it's upstream or downstream or buyer or seller. There's these two big systems usually called ERPs. And what you have in between them, and maybe you have a CRM in there or an OMS or WMS too, but what we view visibility is everything connecting these big organizational level systems, because you find in the world there is a very much a lack of visibility. And so we want to address all of that end to end, to Stephanie's point. In the visibility world, all those spreadsheets that are hiding on somebody's personal desktop, all of the different websites or web portals that people are using, and we want to tie all of those things so that we can create maximum level of visibility.
Right. And when you talk about connectivity, are you referring the same definition as Steph was saying in terms of accessibility, or is that a different level? So we talk about accessibility, availability, and connectivity. Are they all interrelated, or are they all separate, or there's some overlaps there?
No, they certainly are all interrelated. In like I was mentioning, with disparate teams all over the world, you need all three to go hand in hand. Because if you have, again, a disparate email, living on somebody else's hard drive, and you need to access that data because it's critical in your supply chain, you need to bring all of those users into a centralized location. In our world, in our view, that's a centralized cloud platform to help bring all of those pieces together.
Steph, we know that the challenges of industry are quite great. And when you look at technology and look at all the issues that we talk about, it's quite complex as a jungle. What are the challenges and priorities facing industry today from your point of view, from IDC's view?
All right, so we've actually run a number of surveys recently that, and it is quite important that they were run recently because due to the recent circumstances and, the elephant in the room, COVID-19, but we don't want to dwell on that, but it's certainly, we need to look at steps moving forward. Right. From a perspective that we're seeing is that organizations are challenged by traditional things that happened even before COVID-19. So cost continues to be an impact, a concern. But where we may have seen costs standing out as a big challenge or priority for organizations, it's starting to be normalized with other priorities that they have. And that's usually around making sure that they're able to meet service level agreements from a contract perspective if you're on the service provider side, being able to make quality requirements if you're on the manufacturing side. We have concerns about supply chain visibility. And so that's pushing manufacturers and organizations in the region to focus on a number of key things. So I have a slide that I prepared a little bit earlier, and if we could just pull that up. What manufacturers are actually looking to focus on in order to reduce the supply chain risk that they have. The first one is, an obvious one. It's overall supply chain visibility and looking up and down the supply chain, being able not only, which is what we saw early on, is the supply shock where we had supply constraints, but being able to have a view into what could potentially be an issue with demand shock. Related to the supply side, direct materials and finished goods sourcing, being able to pull in those direct materials. Organizations are looking at nationalizing, aligning with government policies that are asking for nationalization. We're expecting there to be a change where it says if you want to sell in my market, you're going to have to make in my market. What is also interesting is the compliance side, where people are actually concerned about the regulatory compliance and the sustainability aspect of it. This was particularly interesting, and we'll have a piece of data that comes out later this week. But from a supply chain risk mitigation perspective, organizations are actually starting to see sustainability come up as part of the story that they're telling with overall supply chain visibility and direct materials sourcing as a way to mitigate their supply chain risk, which is fascinating, I think. Now, if we just go to the next slide, just to illustrate the visibility aspect a little bit further, talking to automobile manufacturers, talking to high-tech manufacturers, talking to even the SMEs, you know, having that visibility into tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers is relatively easier for them. But even some automobile manufacturers that we spoke to are saying that they really struggled going beyond tier 1. So having, again, that visibility into what is happening beyond there, and where they were held up were things being held in ports, not knowing where, you know, they can actually start to implement risk mitigation activities through that information accessibility. So having the visibility is really important. And being able to, as part of that, once you have the visibility, you're starting to be able to manage the complexity a little bit more, looking at the demand and supply chain, supply side impact, and being able to deal with what would be typically flagged as a non-strategic item. So looking at, you know, if you don't have the packaging, you can't ship the product. Yet packaging has typically been something that people didn't look at from a strategic perspective. So the other thing I'd just like to mention here is that lean has in some cases damaged supply chains under the most recent circumstances. So organizations are starting to see how they can re-lean or resilient lean their supply chains. And that's bringing up some interesting opportunities with regards to supply chain visibility as they start to increase their network, have more nodes, have more transport running between those networks, and you know, being able to keep an eye on everything and coordinate it as a process.
So coming to your charts, which are extremely powerful in terms of the visual, how are people getting their head around this enormous challenge of putting the whole thing together, understanding what's going on, but then actually digesting and finding solutions?
So one of the things that we're finding is that having a technical vision at the top has been a challenge. So organizations are, and the access to webinars and the like over recent times, we're actually seeing attendance, you know, quite strong, because there are a lot of pushes from governments to actually, you know, put technology in, and management is having to understand that. Usually we don't have issues with director and VP level, it's at the C level where we do have impacts, resistance to putting in these sort of capabilities. When we put in these sort of capabilities, though, what we're talking about is putting in a technology stack. So as Jeff's diagram correctly alluded to, that, you know, you do need to have that joining together between your ERP, your CRM, and being able to understand the flow of information. So connectivity between different technologies is key, and being able to put together the stack that's going to be able to deliver on that visibility is also important. Right.
Jeff, the business landscape is changing very rapidly. We see all sorts of evolutions going on, understanding that there's something needs to be done. But more and more, as we look at both the macro and the micro perspective, there are many challenges our industry is facing. What are you seeing logisticians really grappling with, and where are the difficult areas that they have to address?
Yeah, so there's two main ones that I would mention. The first one is along what Stephanie mentioned for architecture. So you have a lot of nodes. How do you connect those nodes? And what is that architecture to connect those nodes? It's very difficult with the large incumbent systems to connect those nodes in a lightweight, quick way. So that's the first one. And then the second one would be organizational change management. So once you do decide on that architecture from the top or the mid or wherever it's coming from, you can do bottoms up. How do you manage through that change management, stay on a course of milestones so that you're achieving the value that you need to receive out of your efforts in the visibility world? And that's very, you know, organizational and honestly supply chain broadly. Supply chain is really good at change management inside of a factory, but when you get outside the factory and you start to connect all of these nodes, it starts to be difficult to manage that change. And so, but you need to, you know, have a plan and then execute to your plan.
From a technical point of view, you obviously been, from your background, you have dealt with technology all your life. But many people in the industry today are discovering technology, and some technology is quite, it's not difficult, but it's quite complex in understanding, right? How do you upgrade a current scenario to the new vision of technology? This is the challenge that we're all seeing.
Yeah. So you know, and this is something we frequently come across. So first of all, and not to you know, tout the Haven view too much, but we took a more modern approach to technology, wherein it is more user friendly than what you would see from some of the incumbent places. So that's step one. It does not take, everyone on this call probably has a smartphone. And if it took you 6 months to onboard into your smartphone, that probably didn't provide a lot of value for you. However, what I generally see, even with the people that are behind in technology, it still only takes them 2, 3, 4 weeks to get used to a smartphone. And that's incredibly complicated technology that's sitting in your hand. So why can't you apply that to an organizational level when everybody is doing it, you know, every day with their smartphones? And so that's really the way we try to attack this and go through it. Is one, you know, it's not scary. It is easy. We can make it easy. We can step through the process, and then everybody gets confidence. You know, you reach your first milestone and you get confidence. You get your second milestone, you get confidence. It's all about building that confidence in the users so that they can move on a path. And that's what really good technology ultimately does. And that's what, honestly, the smartphone manufacturers, regardless of who it is, has really helped the world honestly do on a daily basis.
Jeff, at Haven, how have you managed this breakthrough in actually transitioning the complex to simple, looking at the part that people should address in a more pragmatic way?
Well, so a couple of ways. One is, you know, we're a web cloud-based architecture, so you log into your browser. You know, we can do more advanced security with our customers, obviously under single sign-on and VPN. But I think the first thing is having that cloud infrastructure, the users coming in, seeing a dashboard that means something to them, right? You're not searching through layers of screens that are data repositories or trying to run reports. You're trying to have screens that bring you useful information and that leads you to that next page of the journey. So that's, you know, how we start to do this. Okay. And then as you distribute that throughout the organization, you just stay focused on the users. You don't try to inundate a user with too much. Right? That's one of the common things that you see a lot is users just bombarded with these, you know, 10,000 row Excel spreadsheets, and somebody says, okay, please make sense of this, right? And it's just very difficult. So one example, just a brief example especially in visibility, is where is the exception? Like, don't give me the 10,000 rows of information, give me the exception to the 10,000 rows so that I can take action on that, right? And so just that little switch, you can lead the user down a much more effective and fruitful path in order to get their jobs done, frankly speaking.
Great. Steph, where are companies spending their time, effort, and money in improving their visibility? Clearly, they've got to do something, but are they doing the right things in your view?
Yeah, so initially we've seen a lot of the first inquiries come out, and I've put together a slide that's looking at the current situation, which is basically helping them to address, you know, where are they and what should they be doing next. So when they are looking at their ability to flatten the curve or ride through certain waves, they're looking to focus their business on activities that are going to get them immediate returns. So they're going to be focusing initially on business continuity and cost optimization. Typically where we've seen that come in, it starts with things like manufacturing floor optimization and transportation optimization. They're two areas that they can get immediate returns from. And the reason is they can actually start to look at, you know, can I make quick decisions that allow me to take advantage of different routes, different, you know, manufacturing levels, you know, bring down my capability from a routing perspective? Can I switch my mode of transport quickly before the prices rise? This sort of capability. So looking at that, that allows them to ensure that they do have the business continuity, they're able to serve customers, but they're also able to reduce costs. Now, what we encourage is a roadmap. So when you are actually starting to look at building this over the long term, you know, we don't know whether there's going to be a second wave and you're going to have to deal with, you know, increased restrictions or things like that. So even, you know, it may not be a wave of COVID-19. What's the next normal? What's the next disaster that's going to come, right? We've been through a number of them over the last decade. So how are you actually going to build in that business resiliency? So from that perspective, putting in a roadmap addressing, as Jeff said, you know, where are the little microbes under your processes, right? Are you going to then prioritize that as a use case to address that? And what technologies are you going to use to address that? But you shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You should be using your existing technology stack to build that capability in. So if you do have a good transportation management system, you do have a good ERP system, how are you going to extend that capability? So again, that interoperability, the ability to connect and to have that information availability so that you can access it when it's needed, and build that out into long-term plans. So you may look at things like being able to you know, integrate across a large number of factory networks and have a digital twin where you're starting to optimize your supply chain and do what if scenarios. So again, it's not about having just a single technology. It's building that connectivity, those layers that enable organizations to then target investments and then look at how they're going to model their enterprise for the future.
Jeff, looking at the chart that Steph just presented, which is an excellent visual in terms of the roadmap, how many companies are really able to go through this journey, considering the complexity and all the elements in the roadmap presented?
Well, it helps when, to the point earlier, that when the top has a vision of implementing new systems, putting in KPIs, and then those organizations are able to follow the path with that strong vision. Where you see the faltering is when people think, okay, I'm just going to throw this system in there and let's just hope that it's the silver bullet. Those are the ones that fail, right? And so that's what we generally see. We get a very strong buy-in from, you know, senior management on a vision, on that architecture, connecting the nodes, going down that roadmap, showing the KPIs that will exist to the earlier, you know, is it cost savings in operations? Is it cost savings in transportation selections? And once you get going on those ROI values, honestly, the rest of the pieces fall in place because nobody wants to go back. Like, no, you start to see some of these gains and you start to see some of the light at the end of the tunnel, and nobody thinks to themselves, wow, I wish my email inbox had 500 more emails frantically trying to figure something out, right? Like nobody thinks to themselves, like, let's go back to the old world, right? You don't want to, if you don't want to get on a propeller airplane to go from Tokyo to London, right? You want the jet plane now. So that's kind of what we try to work through with our customers. And once you're on that path, there's really no stopping. It's like a rock rolling downhill, honestly, from what we see with our customers.
But on that chart and on that information, I think it's very critical. Steph, what is the mindset changes required for people to embrace that? Because there's a lot of competencies to actually execute that roadmap. There are a lot of areas of knowledge and skill that needs to be deployed. How easy are you seeing people understanding what they need to do? I mean, this is different between fact and fiction.
Yeah, so the reality is that we're seeing a lot of organizations struggling with the culture change that's required to bring this on. And it is a step change in the way that organizations think. You know, that old adage of it ain't broke, don't fix it is not going to work moving forward. We've seen that organizations that have faltered with this have done things like not had access to information or premises or whatever over recent events, and how that's going to play out in the future with future disruptions or even, you know, the way the businesses are going to run is going to be you know, key. So having that cultural change, but that cultural change does not have to be hard. It's just about inclusion during the process. You know, if you rock up on a day and say, hey, here's this new system that you now have to start using, I don't think that's going to work. If you have that bring them through saying, you know, what do we need as part of that you know, system implementation, bringing them in as part of this is the information that we need, and having that collaborative approach to actually onboarding a system is quite key. Right. And I think a lot of the technology providers are actually across this. So in making that journey though, you know, utilize the technology partner. They're definitely there to help you with that onboarding and help you get across that hurdle. But be open to also to the fact that the way that we've always run businesses, if you're going to set up a brand new logistics company, a brand new manufacturing organization today versus having done it the 30 years ago when you first did it, you would do it in a vastly different way. And if you want to attract new talent to do that, then you have to think like that.
Right. Yeah, Jeff, your view on that, because clearly you are involved in that every day, aren't you? The mindset change, the training, the retraining, the adapting to the new technology.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point earlier too about if you started it today, how you would start it versus starting it 30 years ago. I think everybody would sit there and kind of say, yeah, we could do it better starting it today. So ultimately there's your goal, right? It's like, okay, well, if we admit that we would start it better today, let's just get to that point as an organization and start down that path, because ultimately that's better probably than what we already have in place.
That's the fact. The fiction is that people don't want to let go of their old baggage. That's the issue.
Yes.
Jeff, how does it really work? I mean, what have you seen customers do? And I think you got a chart on this question as well, in terms of what, yeah.
Yeah. So what we generally see is we start to align different modules with different areas of the business. So if you are in charge of rates and you have a lot to do in the rates world, let's take out the Excel management task, right? All of I haven't come across a single company that doesn't have loads and loads of spreadsheets, but that's not really a value add, right? Managing Excel spreadsheets, not really a great value add, but optimizing your pricing choices and your routes and how you can fulfill demand, that's a value added piece. So let's put a module in there that takes away the non-value added pieces. The next one that I won't go through all the bullets, but you know, the other one is connecting with your logistics vendors, right? Are you calling them up and sending emails to try to get, you know, space on an airplane, space on a container ship, for freight forwarders to pick things up? That's not really a value add. So how can you automatically trigger that action so that the wheels start to turn of your supply chain, right? The next big one that you see in organization, this is around compliance, certainly, but it also is just around organizational overhead, is that documentation management. So all of the additional pieces of information that need to go along with the supply chain, commercial invoices, packing lists, certificates of origin, airway bills, just all of that stuff that comes in from your nodes, how you can bring that in. And so we've seen large mining firms, one in Singapore, if any of you are familiar, of South 32. That's a big example. The other one in the CPG space that we work with is on the Unilever, for the Unilever organization, on really helping that sourcing supply chain put these little modules in at each phase to remove that non-value add actions that really bog down users. And so that's what we see from an end to end, you know, ending with visibility, which is like, where's my stuff on the map? You have your house in order. So then where your stuff on the map is just really easy, right? And now you know where in your exception management too, your fires are burning for the pieces that are on the map, right? What didn't get delivered? What's stuck at port? Because you have your house in order upstream. And so we just follow that through with a series of modules to help.
Jeff, one question on this chart. Obviously, it's a very clear and very linear type of process, but outside of this chart, you've got all the corresponding players. For example, when you're making a booking, you've got your service providers, you've got your airlines, you've got a capacity. If they're not in tune with your model, then the whole thing doesn't work. And again, the track and trace, the data collection at the other side, how is that handshake between the system and the players being managed?
Well, so the first step is in the old model, 30 years ago, when you would go down this path, you had to get these different providers in tune with your model,
Right.
which is connect via EDI to my SAP, and nobody, there's very few companies that have the resources to spend that money.
Right.
So what we do is we change that model where we have a lighter touch. So it's not you have to do this EDI connection. It's like, okay, great. How can we automate emails? How can we automate passing of data? How can we do lighter touch API connections with Maersk, for example, who all these big carriers are starting to open up to. Even in the air freight world, you're seeing a lot of changes there on being able to access certain data and automate these things. APIs is another great example of just that can happen much faster when you get things off the shelf in an API world. So ultimately the answer is change the model, right? Don't require this heavy-handed node connection. Like, let's figure out a way to do a lighter connection.
Okay, great. I just want to bring Steph in to make a comment on this point, and then we'll open up for some questions.
Okay, just on that, I think that Jeff's point about that light touch is actually quite important. And I think, and I did peek into the questions, and I saw that we had a question in there about, and I'm going to steal Ramon's thunder a little bit, but we had a question about if you have a weaker supply chain partner that may not be up to the sophistication. I think this answers this quite well, because that being able to scrape from emails or being able to upload from an Excel or a CSV file, they're the really light touches that you can get partners to do. And once they start to discover that there is some benefits to this sort of automation, then typically they will start going down that journey as well. What we're also seeing, though, is that in some cases, some of the more lucrative contracts and the bigger opportunities are being tied to digitalization, where partners are actually requiring that you have the ability to connect, or at least have some sort of form of financials or some way to accept invoices to start to get that information streamlined. And we're starting to see that play in tender situations a little bit more as well. So, even if you don't have that, you may not want to exclude current partners based on that. Maybe as you engage new partners, you do make it a requirement when you do onboard. But definitely the lighter touch is a way to start, is to bring those that may be a little bit more timid when it comes to digital transformation to say, hey, look, if you can format your emails in this way or start thinking about your spreadsheets in this way, then you can integrate with us and we can all, be a lot faster.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for that point, both of you. Ramon, I believe you've got some interesting questions. Would you like to?
Yes, we do. We've got a whole range of them, Joe.
Right.
But related to what Jeff and Stephanie just said, that lighter touch, allowing people access to your supply chain. Here's a question, though. When you talk about supply chain visibility, what happens if you're a smaller company? You don't have that technology at your disposal, especially if you come from a developing country. What's the solution then, Stephanie?
All right. So as I said before, it is looking at how can you automate email. So if you have maybe a proprietary system, right, that you maybe send out some information, or, in some cases, some of the developing countries have invested in some, they've got their own systems, they've got their own, piece of software that might send out an email. So that email can then has a specific format, and systems can often just scrape from that email and insert it, right? Another way is that looking at that Excel, right? So how do you actually say, all right, I'm going to work with different partners. Is there a way I can structure my Excel sheet so that it's easy to upload, so I don't need to then have to think about, being able to integrate? Another thing, which is something that does happen with a number of systems, is that, is your partner actually giving you access to a portal? So portals can actually be a really good way into a system. So, you can start, maybe you type things in you don't want necessarily to upload from an Excel, though if you do have a large number of transactions, that would be desirable. But looking at how you can use the portals of your partners to start providing that information might be an opportunity as well.
So related to that, how deep should that visibility go? And this is to both Stephanie and yourself, Jeff. How many tiers upstream typically is good enough? And this is a question that we had from Andrew Lee.
So just to, I'm going to answer that question, but I also just want to mention on Stephanie's point too. Accessing a portal and tying it into that level of visibility that you're talking about. So about 10% of the US coffee comes in through the Haven platform. That's across about 45 different origins. And I will tell you, we have users in Papua New Guinea that log into a supplier portal, and all they see is just the need to upload a document. Like, that's it. Just sign. If you have Wi-Fi or even a cellular, it's not a high bandwidth piece of information. Like, you can go that deep, right? So now if you're Folgers or Starbucks, and you actually now are getting connection to Papua New Guinea, and those users that now are uploading your quality certificate, for example. And so it just goes, you just get all the way to that third, in their case, that's, you know, the third layer, with a light touch solution. So I just wanted to combine, you know, both the question and what Stephanie had mentioned.
Very good. For.
In terms of how deep though, I mean, it can be a how long is a piece of string question. However, this relates to the sustainability part that I brought in, is that in some cases we're seeing, you know, whether it regarding deforestation and palm oil, whether it becomes, you know, it's around modern day slavery, that people are actually interested in knowing, or people are actually required, or organizations are actually required to know what is happening in your supply chain. So in some cases, it could be mandated to you that you are required to comply with visibility in your supply chain so that you're able to trace that. We're seeing more from a food production perspective where people actually want to know, you know, where does my food come from? Consumers are becoming more savvy. So, I mean, you're going to have to, and the key with this is what does your market want? And this is a shift that we're seeing in supply chains, is the, you know, what is my market actually doing? What is it demanding? What do the customers need? What is the compliance around it? And a lot of that is starting to dictate what you need to do from a visibility and how deep you should go question.
Well, here's a question for the two of you there. You know, COVID-19 aside, how can online visibility software also help, like the prescriptive way, you know, to navigate the current US-China trade tensions, what's happening in Hong Kong? How do you integrate these rules or potential developments in your supply chain into the software to have insight into the scenarios and alternatives?
So I can chime in here. I mean, we have a rules engine that we actually build out. And when something is 3 days and you've missed a milestone, there is an exception that gets flagged. So we have a, you know, I could go on and on about our rules engine. That's modern technology, right? Like, everybody has a rules engine these days if you're in the modern world. So that's one of the ways that we do it, just very quickly and easily. You expect something to happen at time X, it does not happen by time Y, then do the math and let the user know.
Yeah, but that's milestone management. Yeah, I mean, that's what we used to call it back in the day. But what about the prescriptive way? That means, you know, this is this potential threat to your supply chain. It doesn't need to be US-China trade tensions. It could be a typhoon off Manila. How do you put those sort of analytics into your supply chain or your TMS?
So there's a couple of ways to deal with that. One of the ways that I've seen used quite well is something called social listening. Looking, you know, from a weather perspective, organizations that are able to provide information, and there's a number of different organizations that will integrate with TMSs and ERP systems that actually bring out, you know, what is happening on social media. So typhoons, you start to hear rumbles, early detection from weather. So looking at external data integration, and that sort of integration is certainly a possibility, and there are a lot of different sources for that. When you're looking at US-China trade wars, then you're starting to look at trade and compliance. And again, that integration is key. Can I bring in, you know, are there any trade compliance rules? Are there any, you know, documentation rules that I need to comply with? Is there any trade agreements that I can take advantage of? Again, the integration into those sort of systems is key.
All right, thanks, Steph. We've got a question from Edward Lau. Edward, over to you.
Thanks. Question is, because we talk about light touch interface, so on the light touch interface is beneficial, usually is helpful to ease the node connectivity and all of that to create the visibility. But on the global supply chain, there are vendors and players from developing economies, and some of those are very, very startup organizations. So they're less IT savvy or lack of resources to automate. So how could this be made possible, especially in those weakest links? Sometimes they provide, they hold rather vital information that is needed. So Jeff or maybe Stephanie, can you elaborate how this could be made possible? Thanks.
Yeah, so two real world examples. The first one is, can they send can they compile a CSV and get it into a portal? Because there's a lot of light touch you can do in that world on a lot of things there. That's the first one. The second one is, can you provide a document repository to them that helps your business? So this goes back to supplier portals. Someone upstream may need to do that with their vendors. I totally understand that. But not forcing that vendor to go through an EDI implementation it is, the new model. That's the new way it's done. If it's, even using an FTP server, which is sort of an old way, like there's ways to automate data ingestion now. Emails, as Stephanie mentioned as well, PDFs. Our platform uses optical character recognition on PDFs too. Google has got a whole library about, characters in the world now, which 20 years ago didn't exist. So let's take the characters that are in something that they just scanned with their smartphone or with their printer in their office, and let's, recognize it. Let's say that it's a bill of lading. Let's say that it's an airway bill, and let's put that information into a more structured format.
Yeah, and to take that NLP, the natural language processing, a little bit further, you're looking at, optical character recognition, but you can go into actually having a conversation with the system. So what we're seeing is, in some cases, systems are developing where you can have a text message conversation with them, right? We're seeing systems develop where you can have an email conversation, right? So lowering the threshold on accessibility. It's also making it more friendly for talent, right? Because talent is used to texting, right? I had somebody call somebody the other day, and they said, why are they calling me? I would normally text, So, we have this new mode of conversation that is actually not just something that's useful for younger generations, but is also something that is useful in a low-tech environment where you can just text responses. So that can be another way of interfacing with a number of different systems.
Excellent. It's been a very interesting discussion. Time is running out, so I'm going to have to start wrapping up on this webinar. You've answered many questions about entry, simplification, light touch, very light touch, and how technology can facilitate a lot of the connectivity. So I'd like to just start by asking Steph, what are the takeaways from our discussion now? What are the main points people should sort of take away and think about in the journey to the next level?
I think one of the things that has been highlighted by the questions and also, some of the responses is supply chain visibility is about every player in the supply chain, right? So making it happen for everyone is key. Having people, if you are educating not just yourselves, but educating your supply chain partners, right? Looking at how you can actually bring them through the journey, I think is going to be important to ensure that visibility occurs along the entire supply chain. I don't think it's just about having the digital skills, although our surveys have shown that digital skills are necessary, but they're more accessible than they've ever been, right? We are getting used to dealing with the phones and the gadgets, but, having the interfaces and having the mindset change that says that this is the way to go forward, I think is very important.
So you talk about collaboration, the joint learning journey, looking at the solution together.
Yes.
So you get the buy-in at early stage. Excellent.
And then looking at the solution together also means having them attend webinars so that they can talk openly about their concerns and what they're afraid of, or having a meeting when we're allowed to, so that we can actually do that.
Okay, great, thanks. Jeff, what about your takeaway from this discussion?
Yeah, so the first one is once the, digitalization really isn't a question anymore, organizations need to be on that path. So then the question is, how is that enacted, right? So what's that architecture to connect your nodes, and then going down that path. And when you have actors in the supply chain that are hesitant, how do you help them get over that? So one example on the chatbot piece, there's a lot of systems out there that don't have a chatbot for a small freight forwarder in Jakarta, right? But you need to give that tool and you need to give that access. And so you need to change that conversation so that they can feel comfortable with the tool. So,
Right.
You've got 24-hour-a-day chat live for them globally, right? And making the barriers of entry to those actors lower. In Stephanie's slide before, tier 1 and tier 2, those are the automobile manufacturers, Nike, Apple. They can get to their next tier. Well, the next tier beyond that, right, you have to do things a little bit better for them, right? You have to put that chat bot in place. You have to give them access to that help, and so that they can start to connect into your node. And it only takes a couple weeks, right? We're not talking about a long 1-year journey for these people. And so that's what you generally see. And now, large companies that, trade in palm oil now can go all the way to the person in the office, in Malaysia, that has an old printer who's now, printing something out and scanning it into a document repository for them. And they have every little piece of digital touch point along that. So everybody benefits.
And the scanning is a photo, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and the burden on the smaller players then is much less. So it becomes far less scary.
Jeff, you make it sound so easy and so comfortable. You're so comfortable with technology. You make it sound so easy, and maybe it is. And you're so passionate about the subject. I would recommend everybody on the call to maybe visit your website and actually understand more about what you're doing, because it really sounds like you are enjoying the journey and you are sharing a lot of good experiences with us. That's great. Before I wrap up, our president has a couple of words, a message to share with us.
Okay. No, Joe, just 2 points very quickly. We had some really, really good answers in the chat, which we were not able to address. So what we'll do is we'll reach out to you after this with our friends from Haven and IDC to address those questions for you. Okay, and then we can continue the conversation. The other thing is, don't forget to sign up for LogiSYM Digital. That's in 2 days. We've got close to 2,000 participants. It's going to be broadcast on national radio. So I look forward to seeing you there. Back to you, Joe.
Excellent. Jeff and Stephanie, thank you very much for your insights, your thoughts, and your open discussion. I think your insights and the facilitation for everyone to embrace and engage in technology is very important. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights. Thank you to all the audience who have participated. And as our president has said, we will endeavor to try and answer all the questions offline so that people actually appreciate more the content of our webinar. Again, thank you all very much. Stay safe, stay well. To the next time. Bye for now.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.